Hi, Misha here.
This is J. Rowe.
And it's time for Q&A 21, aka of legal drinking age. And this will come out around 4th of July. Seemed like a good time because it's been a minute. I looked and we posted the Q&A at the last day of March. So yeah, it's been just 2.5 months. So we've got a couple of questions that popped up.
Well, this Q&A can finally buy cigarettes and assault weapons.
I think the cigarettes are 18, aren't they? Or they're 21 now?
No, they moved up to 21 too.
Alrighty, yeah, I got a few questions here, and yeah, as usual, Patreon subscribers, $1 a month. You can throw in questions, put up a comments post in the Patreon, and every 2 to 3 months, kind of collect some questions. Also, from the private messages, and we hang out and do this, especially on days like this where it's rather too hot to be outside anyway.
Yeah, we're actually getting a little bit of a reprieve this week. It's only going to be, 85 degrees.
Yeah, but the humidity is strangely 105%.
It manages somehow.
Yes.
Okay.
So we'll just, dive right in.
Our first question comes from Matthew Noble. And I think most of this Q&A is going to be the Misha show for sure, because it's a lot of imports and AKs and
we'll see.
Exactly your wheelhouse, and not so much mine, but we'll see what happens. Matthew Noble wants to know, I'm curious on your thoughts on many of the AKs that were never imported into the U.S. Maybe you've heard things about their features and reliability. I was thinking maybe the AKs from North Korea, Albania, Venezuela, Iraq, India. Didn't they have a license from Russia recently? I just figured that it's a topic you've never really done. Anyway, thanks for sharing your knowledge.
Well, and this one's a good one to start with because the answer is in a lot of ways no, but it kind of gets to what I do here. I don't like speaking about guns that I, for one thing, have never handled, and for another, have never owned, at least for a time, and really have never shot. I like to give things a good time. And remember, blind, so can't look at pictures online, and a lot of what we know about those guns are based on photos. And very few, even parts for those guns are in the USA. And so I don't mind doing a parts kit build, for example, doing a Russian clone or whatever, but I don't really know much about them because, yeah, I can't really do pictures. I will say, though, like, for example, the North Korean Type 58, it's essentially a Russian Type 3, and most of those are essentially just copies of a Russian with maybe different selector markings or different furniture, maybe a different muzzle device, but that typically is the difference. As far as reliability and durability, they're all made for militaries, so generally speaking, while fit and finish, the cosmetics can be up or down. For example, I would say East Germany and Poland are kind of at the top, and Romania isn't. Functionally, they're all going to be roughly the same because they're all kind of made to the same general Soviet mil spec. So, and around here, I'd love to get my hands on one, but I hate doing a video about a gun
that you can't even put your hands on.
Yeah, first-hand experience. Otherwise, it's just me reading a Wikipedia article
and then just regurgitating.
Yeah.
Now, I will say that despite the limitation of not being able to make an assessment of things from pictures, you have this uncanny ability, and I've seen it time and again, and it never gets old. Actually, the look on people's faces, your ability to walk into just about any gun shop, and just from kind of feeling out what they've got in stock, your ability to kind of identify the years that things were made, and I mean, I've even seen you identify things down to the armory just based on on furniture and configuration and. It's always impressive. And, I'm not going to blow too much sunshine.
Well, and it's sometimes the difference, and that's one reason you don't see me doing a lot with, say, M1 Grands, because M1 Grands, most of the differences have to do with different drawing numbers or roll markings, things like that.
Yeah.
But other guns, like say Arasakas, there are big differences. Like the way they machine this part changes from factory to factory. So that's why, for obvious reasons, I tend to gravitate towards variations that are physically different, not just different roll markings or things like that. Things more visual, obviously, don't have as much to offer me. So,
sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, great answer. Moving on to question from dapadan. He says, I don't want fop, damn it, I'm a dapadan man. And ain't this place a geographical oddity, 2 weeks from everywhere. Anyway, it's his,
and you were worried you wouldn't say much.
It was his joke, not mine. He's the one that calls himself Dapadan. Hey, Misha, wanted to ask you if everything's all right with Dave at JDI. That's a good question. Been waiting for a bunch of parts for over a year now, and he hasn't responded to my emails. I understand he's busy, but last time he wrote me was in November, and he stated he'd be shipping at the end of the month. Any thoughts on what's going on?
Yeah, and actually, that was a private message question, but I wanted to pop it out here. Here's a JDI gun.
Just to be able to get the word out.
Yeah, here's the deal with Dave. He's a lot like me, although probably even more so. Call him. Emailing him is kind of iffy for a lot of us, but he's pretty good about phone calls, especially if you leave a voicemail, because he usually has his phone. Keep in mind, too, he does travel a lot, and he's had a lot of personal stuff, but he's still around. I mean, he shipped several guns. We even did that interview with him in March of this year, so he's still kicking. But my best advice, and he's even told me this to pass it along, yeah, just give him a call.
Yeah, sometimes, especially when things start to get a little overwhelming, out of sight can mean out of mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean,
I'm bad about that. I'll be like, I'm busy right now. I'll reply in an hour. Well, in an hour, the phone's rang 8 times, and I've received 10 more emails, and it just.
Well, and it took me forever and a day to realize that if I needed to get hold of you, I better leave a voicemail if I call.
Yeah, and I think it's just the thing is too. Even people who can see, you go to clean out your voicemails, and you're like, oh crap, I didn't call that person. It's a little more just in your face.
Sure.
And with all the guns coming in, he is getting a lot of communiques. Between him traveling a lot, again, I'm making excuses. I'm just saying I've found when I call him, I get him on the phone. He picks up at least half the time, and even when he doesn't, he calls back. Yep. So that's my advice. That's what I want to include here. If you need JDI in a hurry, pop him an email. He's on Facebook too. I don't have Facebook, so I don't really know anything about his Facebook regularity of communicating, because Facebook is lame. Anyway,
you got to be careful saying that kind of thing. Eventually, they're all going to own each other.
That's okay. You know, Elon Musk decided not to buy it, so it's all good.
Okay, Appley C wants to know, given all the craziness and probably impending bans, where should he put his money? What is a buy with some inflation protection and long-term value where you get what you pay for? What are you recommending these days? It's a really broad question.
Yeah, honestly, I want to say, fuck if I know. Because I wish I had a crystal ball. What I would say not to do is Bitcoin, because I feel like that ship has sailed. Like, it was a great thing to do 10 years ago, and I've heard tell that it might dip again, but right now, When you get all these bots trying to get people to buy it, that tells you shouldn't be one. Whenever people are telling you to buy something don't do it. When no one's talking about it, that's when you buy stuff. And of course, that extends to guns too. You know my personal taste. Imports are always a solid thing with guns. Parts kits have been doing really well. I would be hesitant to get into AR-15s unless it's a very specific special type, because there are so many ARs out there. And yeah, if a ban comes through, they'll probably go up in value a little bit, but with millions of receivers out there, how much are they really going to go up?
Sure. Well, and when you're dealing with a lot, I'll try to avoid throwing any brand names out, but when you're
behind me. That's why I thought he was on the back of my chair.
Us. Yeah. I mean, when it comes to he's
like Lester.
Jeez. When it comes to the brand names that are really widely distributed, where they're kind of an entry level AR, a good quality product.
Like Palmetto State, for example.
Sure.
Perfectly good, but
or even look at Bushmaster. I would say that those kinds of things are. I mean, it's not like they're really going to lose a lot of value. They're not going to gain much either. But high-end custom AR platforms from a bigger name, higher dollar manufacturer. One of the nice things about those things is even if you just treat it as a safe queen or you go out and use it, it's still going to maintain, if not gain, some of its value.
And that's what I've noticed too, and I've told a lot of people, I don't notice a significant depreciation if you go out and shoot a gun or keep it new in the safe.
Sure.
Maybe 5 or 10%, but good grief, I enjoy going out so much. I'm fine with that.
I mean, I know guys that wouldn't even necessarily want a pistol that looks like it hadn't even had 100 rounds through it yet. You know, I've got a couple of fairly expensive pistols, and I didn't get a compliment on it until it started to have a little holster wear.
Well, like
now it looks like a gun.
Any gun is test fired at the factory, so there's no truly virgin guns, really.
Right.
They've all had 3 to 30 rounds put through them. So what's a few more going to hurt?
If not more.
Plus, this is something else, and this goes for more, I don't want to say budget-minded, but, full production, not put together and tested by a gunsmith. What if there's a problem under the hood? What if there's a bad part or a missing part? If you go out and shoot it, you can get warranty work done. If you don't shoot it for 5 years, that warranty could be expired.
Yeah, you might miss the window for a problem.
Or the company could be out of business.
Yeah.
So at the very least, I say go test fire it. And I do that a lot with the new gun.
Sure.
I'll test fire it once or twice, and then maybe not look at it.
Make sure you're satisfied with it.
Yeah, make sure it runs good. Know, hey, this is a dependable gun. And that way I also like to be able to tell customers, especially with like new guns, like, yeah, I've shot it. It worked well.
And I mean, it's not at all uncommon for there to be some manufacturing hiccups along the way where just a certain run of serial numbers like, oh, this was off out of tolerance, whatever. So it's always a good idea.
Recently, LMT had a small hiccup with a couple of guns that I heard about. Doesn't mean the brand's gone to hell. It just means they had a small hiccup.
Every now and then, something might go out of tolerance and got through QC on one day. And
no factory makes every single part in house. So with subcontractors involved, especially after 2020, it's hard to get some stuff, and sometimes we have to use parts we haven't used before.
From Omri Ashkenazi. Hey Misha, love your videos, been watching for years. I had a question regarding Type 8 FFLs and was hoping you could tell me if my idea has any basis in reality or if it's not feasible.
Type 8, FFL 8 would be an importer of items, firearms that are not Class 3, not destructive devices, just to clarify for people.
So it's kind of
it's an import, but
kind of an entry level to import. But with more restrictions than
it's just
than being Uncle Sam.
Not restrictions, but if you do destructive stuff, that's like more stuff, like SOT type stuff. Sure. Anyway, I just wanted to clarify. So 08 is kind of a standard basic importer.
But yeah, Omri's been toying with the idea of getting a Type 8, and he is says he's been trying to import some parts kits, magazines, spare parts from Israel. He speaks Hebrew quite well and has some ties there, and thought he might be able to use this as an avenue to bring some parts to the States for resale. He'd been trying to start a small parts business, but his margins were slim.
Yeah, right now the problem,
and buying in bulk is a problem.
Yeah, well, right now the problem is cost of shipping. Oh my God, the shipping companies have. A lot of them closed. A lot of them went on hiatus. Those that remain know that they're in more demand, and they charge for it. And recent experience has shown us that borders can just close.
Right.
The problem with Israel, you've got PW Arms, Century Arms, of course IMI, later IWI, that's been importing stuff out of there all the time for decades.
Right.
I know they've got a lot of guns, but I'm not sure how many is left. And even then, a lot of it does end up kind of being given away as military aid.
So would you say, not necessarily that the market is saturated, but access to the market has kind of been soaked up by and large for the people that are already able to do that?
Right, and a lot of times
not room for a lot of new players.
A lot of times these companies come in and they'll get legal binding agreements, exclusives even. Not all the time, but...
Well, I guess to be more direct to his question, I mean, would you recommend it something that he tries to move forward with, or
if he feels passionate? But I would advise lots of patience, because everything has to be approved for import by customs and ATF. You get all your forms. You better like paperwork, and you better be prepared to deal with emergencies.
Sure.
Like if the paperwork is not filled out correctly, even if it wasn't your fault at all, it's your responsibility to fix it.
Yeah, there's sure to be a learning curve associated with it. I would say it does work to his benefit, though, that he has personal, social, professional connections with the country of export.
Yep.
That there's smile and a handshake goes a long way in any business venture.
Well, and a lot of times,
know people on the ground.
A lot of times too, when you're importing, exporting, whatever, if the country overseas, maybe not Israel because they're a pretty modern country, but a lot of other countries, third world, whatever, if the people over there just run away and disappear with your money, what's your legal recourse?
Yeah.
American courts don't have jurisdiction over there.
Well, that's true, and again, that's where it helps to be connected on the ground.
Yeah, and some of them use escrow.
To not be such a estranged entity from what's going on.
You need attachments over there where if someone screws you, that they'll pay them a visit. You know how the world works.
From what I understand, that's kind of the way it can work in Israel sometimes.
Yeah, probably.
Will D wants to know. He lives in a banned state, Massachusetts, where guns manufactured prior to the '94 assault weapons ban have no feature restrictions and are one of the very few easy ways to obtain an AK. He's interested in a Hungarian FEG and has seen some KBI imports for sale. But how do you know if the gun is pre-'94 ban or after '94?
Okay, short answer, you don't. But let's back up. And I wanted to bring this question. This was actually a question he sent me through private message, but I thought it was worthy of being in this video. This is a post-ban Hungarian FEG SA85M. Now, in the pre-ban era, they were imported under the Kastner name. Same owner, he just changed it to KBI during the post-ban. So it's really easy to tell if it's post or pre-89, which was the import ban. Pre-ban guns had all the features. There's one behind us we'll look at later in the video for a different question. Post-ban, they had to go to the thumbhole stock. And serial numbers, they start off around 4700 SM0, 4700, give or take. Kind of picking up where the pre-bans for the fixed stock left off. And they seem to end around 27,000. So this one is a 22,000 something, meaning it's towards the end of production. We know that they started coming in around 90, and we know that guns with a standard capacity magwell, i.e. double step, like this one, they were allowed in throughout the 90s, and then in early 98, that was prohibited for importation. So after that, these were replaced by the SA2000M. That's what we know. 94 ban was a domestic ban, not an import ban. So no one really took note or cared because it didn't really affect anything. What I can also say is this one has the short gas system, the AMD 65 length. Based on what I've observed, and this is just anecdotal, the guns with the shorter gas system came in towards the end. So I would say, and this is just rule of thumb, if your gun has a serial under 10,000, pretty safe that it's probably pre-94, September to be exact. If it's over, say, 15, 20,000, pretty safe to say.
Probably not.
It's not, right. Unfortunately, there's no list. There's no legal way you could prove it in court one way or the other, so it kind of gets down to what your own dealer or local police or whatever would.
You may end up having to take somebody's word for it.
Yeah, exactly. I wish there was a better answer, but there just isn't. Mike Kastner might know, but I looked before doing the video and before answering the question for him originally, and I could not find anything that explicitly said that, unfortunately. But I tried.
Okay, next question. William McDonald wants to know, and I'm sure you get this question all the time, because it's a good question. It's honestly one that never wears out. But what do you think I should get? Maybe a WPB 556 kit. Also thinking of getting an RPK kit from Royal Tiger. I think I should get one of these before they're gone. What are you recommending these days?
That's why I brought this out. This isn't a kit build done in the US. This is an actual imported Jack rifle in 556 223. Did a video for the Patreons looking at this a little bit, but we will do a full range video as time allows. Cool gun.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one reason it hasn't been at the top of the list is because I expect it to be boringly reliable, which means now that I've said that, stay tuned. It's going to like fall apart. But I mean, WBP, and the other thing, the name, he wrote WPB, but a lot, it gets inverted a lot. It's really weird. It's
and I think I read it the way he wrote it, but WPP.
Yeah. But yeah. It's not his. It's not just him. I'm not picking on him. Lots of people do it. It's almost like a daily thing. It's kind of like, some people say Kalashnikov, even though it's Kalashnikov.
Right.
It's like that. But there's something in the brain that wants to make it WPB. So not picking on you, I promise, but it's one of those kind of funny, quirky observations
it
of
just
the
happens
human
to everybody.
brain.
Yeah.
Mine does it too.
A little bit of a tongue twister somehow.
Yeah, somehow. But now, parts kits, now I would say if you're going to get a kit, you might kind of steer towards the military, like find a real Polish Circle 11 kit. Not that the WBPs are bad guns, but these are shooter guns or shooter kits. They're not really historical or collectible. Whereas a RPK kit, especially if it's Russian, even if it's Romanian, they're not making any more of them. At least not that are coming into our damn country, not from Russia anytime soon. So if you're going to get a kit, I would say try to find one that is a military, and if it has matching numbers, I've known to a lot of kit collectors that matching numbers count for a lot.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Jacob Perry says, Misha, love the channel and the information you share with us. Just received a 553P from Dave, and I have to say it's a work of art. I was hoping you could give me some advice. I'm working on expanding my collection and would like something based on the AR-18 or AR-180 gas system. Doesn't need to be a copy, just a derivative. I know there are several, but I'm hoping you can point to something robust like this that I'll be able to maintain since I do shoot all my guns. I've been considering the Bren 2, but I'm told parts availability isn't good. Very open to other options if you can recommend some. Keep up the great vids.
So yeah, I brought the Bren 2 out again. As you know, it's a favorite. As you know, shot it several times. How to say this? I wouldn't worry much about parts breakage, because any gun, anything mechanical can potentially fail. And outside of your basic AR, AK, maybe your FAL, your G3, your M14, outside of the ones that are just in the hundreds of thousands, millions here, all your other kind of boutique guns, even the original Armalite AR-18, AR-180, their parts are basically unobtainium. Look at Daewoo's, for example. You can't get parts. So the Bren 2 is not unique in that. But the thing is, most of these guns, they're built in a military factory to a military standard. And if the parts aren't really meant to fail. That's not to say they can't, but they should be built with quality bolts, quality springs that, considering they were built to potentially be fired in full auto, being fired in semi-auto, even if you're a pretty regular shooter, they should not wear out anytime soon. So I don't worry too much about spare parts. The only spare parts I do kind of actually consider, and this is why I had this out earlier, let's fetch it again, magazines. This is one spare part that I really do care about, because magazines are a wear part. They're also a commonly lost or damaged part. Sometimes people accidentally leave them in their friend's car and worry about it all weekend. So I would say whatever you're going to do, get enough mags to suit you. Because like on a regular 5.53, it takes Swiss mags. When they're gettable, when JDI brings them in, they're $70. When they're unobtainable, they go to $200 or $300.
Right.
And eventually, there's going to be an import ban on them. Something's going to happen.
I was going to say magazines are one of the easiest things, the most likely things to be regulated.
Absolutely. So that's one thing I think is kind of neat about this version of the 5.53. This is called the AL-US or the 5.53 NATO. It takes standard AR mags. So that's another, and the reason I'm pointing that out, and since he brought up the Bren, is it too takes the same standard mag. If I can pop this out in a weird angle here. So actually a Bren's probably a better choice than some others that maybe take proprietary mags. But that's one consideration. I'm not saying only buy Stanag mag guns. I'm just saying when you buy it, try to grab mags for it, because don't expect them to be around forever, because they do disappear, especially with the guns. But no, I was at the same time. Yeah, at the same time, I would not limit myself to just ARs and AKs, because you can get parts, because you're missing out on a lot of cool guns. Finally, if a gun has a failure part, let's say the firing pins are known for breaking, the aftermarket will fix it, because you're not the only owner of that gun in the USA. So if let's say there's 10,000 guns here. That's a great little boutique business for some small CNC shop to make spare firing pins. And that's exactly what's happened in the past. Like,
and there are more and more of those little pop-up companies all the time.
Well, CNC tooling's gotten reasonable now.
Right, yeah. You get a few people that have got a quality enough CNC lathe to do the job. And they can just kind of target where the shortages are and, modify on the fly to switch up production.
It's super easy. And most of these, there's a certain commonality of basic specs to other things they can modify.
Let's see. Our next question comes from Antigonus. I recognize that name too. He writes them quite a lot, huh? Of all the factory import AKs that have come into the U.S., which ones do you think are the closest clones of a Russian AKS and AKMS, respectively?
So that's why I brought these out. The truth is...
Funny you should ask. You just happen to have these.
The truth is there's no perfect AKMS clone. Now, AKS, I would say that would be the Chinese Polytech Legend milled with the underfolding stock. It's not exact, but it's pretty close. You could also say the Arsenal SAS M7 Classic. However, much like the one behind me, that RPK, even though the parts are Bulgarian, they're assembled here in Las Vegas, so technically not an import. So with that said, to the AKMS, here's my Polish AKMS. This is a kit build, one of the old Atlantic. What makes the AKMS is the dual side locking, the metal riveted stock, and then of course all the standard AKM features that we know and love: stamped receiver, 45 degree, all that stuff. But that's a kit build. As far as an actual import, this is it, the one that's been kind of behind us on the video. I would say the Hungarian SA85M underfolder. The stock is the right style, locks on both sides, metal, stamped receiver, has the 45 degree gas block. However, what kind of keeps this from being really true, it has the ported gas tube, the slab side handguard, the kind of unique wood pistol grip, and the non-lightning cut bolt carrier. So the details are a little different, especially the handguards kind of jump out at you. But this is the best import we've probably had, because if you look at things like the Wasser, the Romanian Wasser underfolder, it actually has an AKS underfolding stock, not an AKMS. To me, that's a big difference. And the stamped Chinese guns, the 56S-1s, they're definitely not AKMSs. Of course, there's no Bulgarian imports, and to date, WBP has not done an AKMS underfolding import. They might one day. The only other one I can think of is the Zastava. There was the NPAP underfolder, but again, that's a M70 pattern, so totally different handguards. So my answer would be the Hungarian.
Wolfie says, thank you for sharing all your knowledge. Do you do much studying on the American Revolution and Civil Wars?
I mean, I did my degree in history. The Revolutionary War, I'm going to be honest, it's not of permanent interest to me. I mean, I definitely know it. Honestly, the politics after it interests me more, because we won that war because the British didn't care enough, and they were actually much more concerned with what France was doing. It was such a sideshow in the rest of the world. It's kind of funny how important it is to us here.
Sure.
But the Civil War actually, was a primary thing that I studied in college. It kind of, even when I was a kid, it interested me quite a bit.
Well, and when you've got kind of a world-spanning empire that the sun never sets on, where the colonials are acting up all the time. If it's not the Indians, the Australians, and this time it's the Americans. To them, I'm sure it's an exaggeration to say that they weren't paying attention. But yeah, sure, it might not have had the same kind of level of world-changing importance of outcome. They might have thought, oh well, we deal with we deal with civil unrest all the time. So what's one more revolution? The French are busy taking over the other half of the continent we're trying to own. So,
and not only are the French busy, they're also becoming increasingly unstable. You know, you have the French Revolution coming, and then you have Napoleon coming. So yeah, they see that not only is their biggest rival doing this, they're actually very unhinged, you know, kind of schizophrenic about it. So, yeah, France was of increasing concern.
Right. We weren't the competing hegemonic power in the world that they had to be the most concerned about.
We were just kind of a headache. We were kind of like that beater car they'd been trying to fix. They just decided to just cut their losses and sell it at auction.
And then they said, we hate ticks and mosquitoes. We're out of here.
Yeah. And now we're best friends.
It seems to me that a lot of your history studies were more Euro and Slavic centric, really.
Well, I did a lot in the 19th century with the Civil War, the antebellum and the South and all that, because it is the pivoting, the turning point of America, because the issues that were finally that had to be faced in the Civil War were issues that were there from the very founding of this country.
Sure. I mean, and the founders were aware of some inherent contradictions between the promise they were trying to make and whether it was really attainable to everybody.
Let's just put it like this. They kicked that can down the road for 70 years, and eventually the bill came due. There's a lesson for us there today. You can only not deal with issues for a certain period of time before there's a John Brown that goes crazy and things happen, and then a war starts a few years later, and
okay, let's move on to this question from Michael Montz. What are your thoughts on the recently announced semi-auto only Colt M5 carbines? I see they own the trademark for M5 as well since 2006. Are lawsuits incoming against Aero? Maybe even USG for the newly adopted 6.8x5.1? Looking forward to you reviewing one. I am too, actually. I can't wait for us to get our hands on one.
Yeah, I don't know when that's going to be.
Who knows?
I saw the announcement, but then you read, and I talked to my Colt rep last week. He's like, I had no idea. So Colt's known for saying a lot and delivering, and being Colt, who knows what they'll say on them, what they'll look like, how close to any kind of spec they'll be. Colt is not known for making the wisest decisions. I mean, these are the people that are roll marking their rifles carbine right now.
Yeah, indeed.
So I don't know. It's Colt, but no, I wouldn't think. I mean, it's kind of already become a thing that you can't really trademark something that's in common vernacular use, like M1, M4, M5. They can trademark it, but I don't think they'd have much standing for a lawsuit.
Yeah, it reminds me when Paris Hilton tried to trademark the phrase "that's hot."
Absolutely, exactly. You can do that, but I mean, how do you enforce it?
Right. Okay, and we're back. We are going to take Vince Mantia's question. Misha, will Arsenal ever make stamped receiver guns again?
Yes, that's why we stopped here. So here's, I don't know why, my SA RPK5. This is a milled receiver. This is what Arsenal's pretty much known for. But they had a wild hair up their butt. It started off with the SLR 105. That was a blip, though. It really got going with the SLR 106 and SLR 107. It was around 2007, 2008. And these were introduced to kind of be their economy line of guns. But as often happens, after a while they got to be basically as expensive as their milled guns. And then a few years ago, they kind of switched back to offering milleds and kind of got away from stamps again. The funny thing is, the military production Arsenal Factory 10, Circle 10, really only made stamped guns in the 80s and early 90s, and they were typically just the 545, the AK-74 types. They totally skipped over the AKM, the original RPK. They didn't want to do the 7.62 stamped, so it was kind of an aberration that they did stamped at all. They just seem happier doing milled. I don't know if they'll ever do any more U.S. semi-auto stamps, but I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't. And as I've said in other videos, I've always been suspicious about who actually made the stamped receivers themselves. Now, the guns definitely come out of the Arsenal factory. They're final assembly done there. But as we said earlier in the video, every company has subcontractors. So it's entirely possible that they have a subcontractor for the stamped receivers that are just sent over, and that subcontractor would be named ISD. I mean, I don't know who they'd be. But
Imperial Star Destroyer?
You can't prove that. Executive Vice President Thrawn just owns the factory. But no, I just have to wonder, back at SHOT Show a year or two ago, they said they were going to bring in some ISD guns outright, 74 types, but they, at least to this point, mid-2022, have still not appeared yet. And they seem kind of stuck with their milds, and I can't blame them. The stamps got more and more expensive, and the mill guns are just so nice. They're very smooth. They've got double hook triggers. They tend to have a little bit better finish on them.
We got more gun than table here.
Oh, I know. Try having an RPK. Yeah.
There are worse problems to have.
Yeah. And looking at the stamp, it's no slouch, but it's not a lot smoother than a lot of other mill stamped AKs. I just think
this is a really unusual comp on this thing.
This one?
Yeah.
It's extension to make it legal. The barrel's 12.5 inches.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a four-piece Bulgarian flash shutter.
It looked very weird.
Making it legal.
Yeah.
But I think with the mills, they have more of a company identity, and I think there's just more market interest. So,
sure. Well, and that tends to, in an ideal situation at least, tends to drive availability. So
I think they would be smart to continue focusing on the mill guns. They sold better. The return rate was lower. Customer satisfaction was higher. There were some odd issues with the stamped guns. I'm not going to get into them here and now. And a lot of times the internet kind of blew them out of proportion. But
sure.
Yeah, they didn't have quite the reputation of the mills.
Let's see. Cody W. Wants to know, do you think we'll see bans on firearms and ammo imports from NATO allied countries like Beryls from Poland or Croatian-made Springfield stuff and parts? What about ammo from places like Bulgaria and Serbia?
Yeah, probably. I mean, the thing is, whenever there's an import ban, it's not country specific. It's these guns aren't allowed in anymore. So where they come from is immaterial. Now, when you see countries mentioned, those tend to be sanctions, like China in 94, Russia in 14, 17, and pretty much the entirety of 2021 and 22. But
more a reflection of international than domestic politics.
And those tend to be not firearms. They tend to be banning either companies or countries themselves, not the firearms specifically. And they tend to be direct reactions to international events, right or wrong, more of whereas an outright blanket ban like we saw in 89 under Bush, that's just against guns. That had nothing to do with the countries. In fact, some of the countries hardest hit were our closest allies, like Austria. I mean,
Israel.
Yeah, Israel, yeah. So, but sooner or later, almost all imports stop. And the reason, at the end of the day, does it really matter? It's over. The music stops.
You know how there's always kind of a tendency to wonder how much, backroom dealing and, palm greasing and that kind of thing happens? Do you think there's anything to the idea that domestic producers have anything to do with setting some limitations on imports?
Not really. I think it's low-hanging fruit for political brownie points.
That's kind of my suspicion too.
Like, we banned assault weapons from import. It's kind of like kind of that technically.
Right. It's definitely got an asterisk next to it.
Well, and this is what I remind people: there's no Second Amendment protection for the right to imported guns, like and not just guns, but like imported cars or food. All that comes in at the sufferance of the government. They can stop an import without any real reason.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that doesn't technically infringe upon your right to have it.
Right. And they can be made
if you can find it.
You can make it down the street.
Kind of an end around.
You can make it over in Oklahoma all day long. The import thing is...
I mean, that seems like an awfully effective way to ban AKs altogether. Well, I mean, you got domestics now, but...
Yeah. But that's the reason you see a lot of domestic. That's why you see Steyr USA, you see Zastava USA, you see IWI USA. That is kind of a way to work within the tight restrictions of the laws as they are today.
And the constant legal hours in billing that it takes just to keep up with the regulations from one day to the next.
Oh, Lord, yes. Yeah, if you're going to do any kind of importation, have a good lawyer that knows guns on retainer.
G Bobby. I recognize G Bobby's name. He writes in pretty often. Hi, G Bobby. Do you think there's a chance we'll see parts and parts kits from Ukraine when the war is over?
That boy ain't right. No, I really don't.
Bobby.
Here's the thing. Ukraine has had basically the same sanctions on them since 2014 as Russia. People forget that. And after that, they're going to have a lot of rebuilding. And keep in mind, they want to stay in the good graces of the European Union and all that. So,
well, they may have to make some capitulations before this thing is all said and done.
I just don't see them politically or in a military position either way to be wanting to sell guns or ammo to the U.S. civilian, especially ammo, really, to the U.S. I think they're going to need every gun and
keep it at home. Yeah.
Yeah, and even if they got extra, I think it would not be politically wise. Seems like something Zelensky might get his butt chewed out by some chancellor in Germany over,
Sure.
You're sending assault weapons to Americans. How dare you, after what your country's been through, to propagate... I'll stop. But you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I get it.
And they've been under sanctions from America for years anyway. We just don't feel it because they don't...
With the current sympathies about the situation, and I have those same sympathies. I'm very clearly on one side, not the other, with that conflict.
For anyone who's on my personal channel, they know where I come from.
Oh, yeah. Okay, next question. Elliot Toscano wants to know, how do you organize all your firearms and ammunition?
I was going to grab one, but mag pouches. At least I love mag pouches. For one thing, they're really fun to collect.
They're kind of neat. And,
they're basically free. There's a few rare ones, but basically if you buy X number of mags, they usually throw in pouches. And we were out at the range shooting. We had 8 mags for that one gun. I know I've got them all collected when all my pouches are full. Otherwise, you might go, well, did I put 7 in the range bag or 8?
Yeah, you're paying really close attention to those mag pouches for sure.
Well, and they keep your mags from banging against each other. Right. And sometimes they have little pockets, which are cool.
He didn't ask you how you organize your magazines.
Well, he asked about organization.
Well, there's more to it. Yeah, he said, how do you have a system to help keep track of it all? I feel like a hoarder with shit everywhere, and I'm somewhat overwhelmed. And how do you keep track? Well, how does it stay so completely organized and regimented back there all the time?
The thing is, it does start with the pouches because I like to keep the tools. Like a lot of guns have special takedown tools. Sure. Keep them in the pouch so you know where they're at. And then the guns, they're just in a safe room. And
at the very least, you can keep accessories from flying around everywhere.
And that's what I find the hardest to keep, because
little parts.
Guns are big. The little parts are where they get lost. So I would say it begins with mag pouches. If you want, you can have cases, but other than that, yeah, my brain would love to organize every gun in the safe, according to country and year and all. But the size, you're not going to fit this one in the same rack you're going to fit a Krinkov in. It's not going to happen. So,
but you can fit the accessory pouches
in
what next to, if you want them in proximity and storage, you could do it that way. But
and I know this pouch belongs to this gun, so if we want to take this one out to the range, I grab the pouch that's just
and you're ready to go.
And so I know, hey, the right mags are there, the right tools are there, sight tools, sometimes scopes are in there. It helps. Not perfect, but it's inexpensive and it's kind of fun to do.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah.
I think it's still kind of an assumption. It's a Mac. I mean, there is not a speck of disorganization or chaos anywhere. I promise.
To be fair, my own personal guns are pretty organized. Store guns.
If it's coming in, going out,
yeah, you're unpacking.
You just gotta know where it is.
Working on this, and then that's just rote memorization.
And sometimes you've got a little bit more inventory on hand at the moment, and then it's like, well, this is coming in and going right back out.
Yep.
Well, let's take a quick break, and we'll come back to it.
All right. Alrighty.
Okay, Fletcher Christian wants to know what happened to Waffenwerks. How were their AK-74s, and also what happened to Inner Arms?
Inner Arms, just start there. That was started in the 50s by Samuel Cummins, and that was an interesting person. And he brought over a lot of. He was kind of the predecessor to Century, for all that says. But he brought over a lot of cool things, a lot of the militaria. But he passed away. I think the original company ended in like '98, but then it was brought back under a new name, new ownership, becoming Inner Arms. And as far as I know, they're still going today. If they've closed, it was in the last couple of years. Mm. As far as Waffenwerks, first their AKs were pretty darn good, and then they were really not good. They started off building nice AK-74 and AKS-74 kits. They were Bulgarian/Russian kits, and they used chrome line barrels. I think they were mostly U.S. from Green Mountain, but decent chrome line barrels. And they were using receivers from, I believe it was mostly Nodak Spud, and I think there was another contractor, but they're known receivers and barrels, and they were really pretty. They had different finishes. The problem started when they started trying to do their receivers in-house, and they started to just ramp up their basically once they initially met success, it just tumbled down from there. Between trying to do more in-house and make more every month, the guns were so bad that they had to do a recall. They weren't shootable. Then they got bought out by, I think it was DDI, and they disappeared. So they were just one of those AK builders in the USA. They didn't really make many parts aside from some pretty questionable receivers. But there were a lot of companies back then that popped up using the kits because there were so many kits on the market for a while.
Well, and it's one thing to be able to put together a good product out of kits and kind of like your average custom shop will do these days. Mm-hmm. But just because somebody is intimately knowledgeable about guns and engineering and the engineering behind guns doesn't mean that you can readily make the jump into machining and manufacturing. Well, it's a huge talent. You need a very specific pool of talent to be able to incorporate that and not trip over your own feet for the first several years you do it.
Well, what I observe with these companies, they start off small with maybe 4 to 6 gunsmiths on hand. Great. And then they get bigger and they think, we're going to have these gunsmiths train a few just employees, line assembly
We're
guys.
Tired of waiting on parts. Why don't we just make them?
That too. But the thing is that they try to translate their experience to training other people, and then it kind of becomes second and third hand knowledge.
Yeah.
And they don't know all the little tricks and things that 20, 30 years of gunsmithing they be taught.
Well, your gunsmiths and your machinists are not the same pool of talent.
Mm-mm. Yeah, I've heard that a lot. Oh, they made great X. Microtech is a good example. The knife company, they still make good knives. And then there was the MSR STG 556, which is interesting. It didn't turn out so great. But yeah, the Waffenwerks was not a unique company for its day and time. It was one of dozens of little kit building firms that cropped up. And I did sell several of their early guns.
Speaking of parts kits, Fletcher was saying he's got one of their Polish underfolders.
The Inner Arms is what he says there.
Yeah, and he was wondering if that was also a parts kit or if that was something that kind of took place after.
No, the Inner Arms guns were parts kit assembled. The earlier ones would have had the original Polish barrels, later ones U.S. And they're generally considered of higher than average quality, the Inner Arms builds. I know especially like their Tantals were more respected than the Century Arms Tantal builds. Mm.
Okay, Mark wants to know, how do you feel about the progress that American AK manufacturers are making? How do they stack up against the imports that are currently available?
And this is a question that's kind of been answered several times, so I'll just kind of in synopsis. I mean, it's great that they're making progress. I will still take an import because okay, PSA's been doing it for a few years, Kalashnikov USA for a few years. Compare that to a factory in Romania that's been literally doing it for 60 years. And they got the TDP, we'll call it that for shorthand, straight from the Soviet Union. So I'll still take that level of experience.
Sure.
Because
that actually kind of ties in with the last question a little bit about jumping into new manufacturing and that sort of thing. There's a learning curve, and there are things you can anticipate, and then there are mistakes you have to make before you stop making them.
Oh Lord, yes. And that's hell, that's life, isn't it?
That is life, yes.
Business for sure. And like we were talking about a little bit ago, imports will end eventually. And then you can switch over to the US stuff. Or for example, Kalashnikov USA. Now that Segas, and Vepers for that matter, but Segas as they apply to KSA, are banned, and they're not coming in again. They're fully sanctioned. Okay, KUSA is the next best choice. If Kuger AKs, Wassers are banned, sure, next best choice. But for right now, I still give the prominence to imports while we can get them. Personal choice. But I'm glad they're making progress. But you know what's funny is a year or two back, the US mid AK thing was at the forefront. I don't hear as much about it this year. It's kind of, I mean, they're still there. In fact, there were some rally defenses that came in just a few weeks ago. It seems to be less of a hot topic.
I completely accept and agree with that answer. But I also have to wonder, I mean, an AK is a relatively simple machine compared to some other. I guess what I'm saying is, yes, the point about long years of experience of making the same product and making it successfully. But do you think there's a little bit of a purist element in the favoring imports that's more sympathetic than pragmatic?
Let's put it like this. It took the Soviet Union with all of its resources about 15 years to iron out the kinks of the AK, to figure out exactly the right angle, the cut, this bolt channel lug for the exact right tension of this, the exact right hardness of the hammer or softness to interact with the bolt. There's a certain level of experience there that's hard to replicate except with time.
I totally agree with that. I also wonder if it's a technology that's been around for so long that the recipe to the secret hot sauce is no longer secret.
Oh, it's no longer secret. Here's the problem. It's been around too long. It was built with tech from the 1940s. Most of your U.S. shops today aren't even remotely set up with that level of tech. It was made at a time when machines were relatively expensive.
Right.
Human labor was dirt cheap. Now we're kind of flipping that. Machines are pretty much cheaper than ever. I mean, comparatively speaking.
Comparatively, sure.
Labor, on the other hand,
it's certainly more accessible to the small business.
Yeah, whereas
than it used to be.
The AK is not super well suited for CNC computer type stuff. It's really meant to kind of roughly machine apart and then literally file fit it by hand.
Yeah, I mean, with some machines, depending on what it is you're trying to do, you can get started in the machining game for about the price of financing a fancy car.
Mm-hmm. And if you can turn that around and make profit from it, it'll pay for itself very quickly.
Oh, sure. I mean, that's all a matter of know-how and skill and picking the right application. But yeah, I mean, it's exciting that more and more people can get into custom parts.
Well, and look at the AR-15. The early clones from the 80s and 90s weren't that fantastic.
No.
What was it? Not Sentinel. What's the one starts with an S? Oh, good grief. Anyway, the early ones were kind of iffy. It took a little while to kind of figure out how Colt was making the AR. And of course, once they did, it was fine. But reverse engineering has some tricky obstacles. The AK is simple as far as the number of parts. But it has sometimes those individual parts, or even just getting the right steel tempering. That's where I see a lot of them fall down, is with heat treat and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Because no one from Russia is saying, hey, do it this way. These are the numbers.
Yeah.
They have to figure it out kind of by trial and error.
Or you can measure things to the exact measurements that already exist, but that might not tell you why.
That's what I mean. you see what's done. You don't know why it's done, and that way you don't know what you need to.
You can certainly have an idea,
because
but it's easy to miss that kind of thing.
PSA is not copying an AKM point by point exactly. Knowing what needs to be copied exactly and what can be just kind of that's what takes time and effort.
Well, and you also need to give yourself a little bit of room to play with improvement too.
And U.S. companies are needing to make these to make a profit.
Right.
A Romanian company, the tooling is long paid for.
That's true.
It's pretty much pure profit. So the margins there are a lot better for them. PSA is trying to set it up and fix it and do warranty repair work, and it's pretty daunting.
It certainly can be. Alrighty,
guys. Actually, I don't know. I thought this might be a shorter one, but maybe it wasn't. But we greatly appreciate all the questions. And I didn't edit out any. I really appreciate the maturity of the questions, and with all the political stuff going on, that none of them were.
This could have been a very different list of questions.
Right, and I didn't edit a single one out. So people were very mature, and I really appreciate that, because it's been a really stressful spring. But that's why it's always fun to kind of hang out and just, be with each other.
Well, and there are some really important topics that people are getting into discussions about now that we'll absolutely have to address in its own separate. Own separate format.
And especially if things change and happen. But anyway, we greatly appreciate it. Like I said at the beginning, a bucking up, whatever. And you can post questions, and I'll start a new thread post where you become a Patreon a bit mid-July, and we'll probably pick this up October, do another one.
Sure.
Unless there's urgent news. But we greatly appreciate everyone, and hope this was fun, and
I always have a good time.
Yeah, we'll go from there. Getting kind of hungry. So with that, I think I'll just say, please do like, share, and subscribe. Post comments. Check out the link to the Patreon. Any last words?
No, I think that sums it up nicely.
Alrighty, folks. Well, we'll catch you very soon next time, including Earl the Cat.
Including Earl the Cat.
Yes.
We'll see ya.